Deep in the forgotten woods where sunlight filtered through ancient trees, Sarah Matthews stood before a weathered cabin, her 3 children huddled close. 2 weeks ago, she had been a respected office manager. Today, she was jobless, homeless and desperate. The cabin, its windows clouded with decades of dust, seemed to call to her like an answered prayer. Inside, cobwebs draped from ceiling beams and the floorboards creaked under her cautious steps. But it was the old trunk in the corner, partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket, that caught her eye. What secrets did this abandoned cabin hold, and could they possibly change the course of a family on the brink of collapse? 2 weeks earlier, Sarah Matthews sat stunned in her office chair, the termination letter trembling in her hands. 12 years of dedication ended with a corporate restructuring and a 2-minute conversation. "I'm sorry, Sarah. The decision comes from headquarters." Her supervisor avoided eye contact. "You'll receive 2 weeks' severance." That night, Sarah stared at her apartment ceiling, calculating finances while her children slept. The severance would barely cover rent. No savings after putting Emma through braces and Liam's asthma treatments last year. The job market for office managers had dried up in their small city, flooded with similar corporate casualties. Emma found her mother at the kitchen table the next morning, surrounded by job listings and rejected applications. "We'll be okay, Mom," Emma said, her 16-year-old shoulders carrying a maturity beyond her years. She squeezed Sarah's hand before preparing breakfast for her siblings. Liam bounded into the kitchen, 12 years old, and buzzing with energy despite the family's circumstances. "Can I use cardboard from the recycling for my school project?" "Of course, honey." 8-year-old Zoe appeared last, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. "Did you find a new job yet?" Her voice small, sensing the tension. "Not yet, sweetie, but I will." 2 weeks passed in a blur of rejection. The eviction notice appeared the day after her severance ran out. 3 days to vacate. Sarah sold what she could: furniture, electronics, clothes. She kept only what fit in their aging sedan: clothes, important documents, and precious mementos. Emma silently packed one small bag, her face stoic, but eyes red-rimmed. Liam treated it like an adventure, while Zoe cried when they left her bed behind. "Where will we go?" Emma asked, as they drove away from the apartment building. Sarah gripped the steering wheel. "My grandmother owned a little place in the countryside, near Pinehaven. It's probably long gone, but the area has camping grounds. We can stay there while I figure things out." The countryside grew more remote as they drove, cell service fading. When the car began sputtering on the rural highway, Sarah managed to pull onto a dirt road before the engine died completely. "Perfect timing," she muttered, popping the hood. Mechanical knowledge wasn't in her skill set, and the nearest town was still miles away. "Mum, there's a path over there." Liam pointed to a narrow trail disappearing into the woods. "Maybe it leads to a house where we can call for help," Emma suggested. With no better options, Sarah nodded. "Stay together. Zoe, hold Liam's hand." The path wound through dense trees for nearly a mile before opening into a small clearing. There, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, stood the cabin. Its windows were clouded with grime, wooden steps sagging beneath a small porch. The roof appeared intact, though no obvious holes or structural damage. "Mum, we can't just break in," Emma whispered as Sarah tested the door handle. "We're not breaking in, we're seeking shelter in an emergency," Sarah responded, the door swinging open with a haunting creak. "We'll find the owner tomorrow and explain." Inside, dust motes danced in beams of light filtering through dirty windows. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, opposite a small kitchen area with an ancient wood stove. A wooden table with 3 chairs stood in the center. A narrow staircase led here to, Sarah assumed was a loft area. "It's like a fairy tale house," Zoe whispered. "It's probably full of spiders." Liam counted, eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. Sarah ran a finger along the dusty mantel. "It hasn't been lived in for years, but the structure seems sound." They spent the remaining daylight clearing cobwebs and sweeping decades of dust from the wooden floor. Sarah found old blankets in a cedar chest that, once shaken vigorously outside, would serve as bedding. As night fell, the family huddled together on the floor before the fireplace, using jackets as pillows. The children fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's events. Sarah remained awake, watching shadows dance across their faces by the light of her single candle. She'd kept her fears at bay for their sake, but alone with her thoughts, the gravity of their situation pressed down. Jobless, homeless, 3 children depending on her. The flickering light caught something in the corner of the room, the edge of what appeared to be an old trunk, partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket. Too tired to investigate further, Sarah made a mental note to check it in the morning. For now, she allowed herself one quiet moment of tears before extinguishing the candle and joining her children in uneasy sleep. Morning light streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings before yesterday's events flooded back. Her children still slept, huddled together on the wooden floor. The trunk in the corner beckoned. Sarah carefully extricated herself from Zoe's grasp and crossed the room, kneeling beside the mysterious container. It was old but well crafted, leather straps reinforcing the corners, a brass lock securing its contents. She tried the lid. Locked, as expected. "What do you think is inside?" Liam's voice startled her. He stood behind her, hair tousled from sleep. "I don't know, but it's not ours to open." "Maybe there's a key somewhere," he suggested, his eyes bright with adventure. Sarah ruffled his hair. "Let's focus on making this place habitable first." As Emma and Zoe woke, the family established their priorities, finding water, food, and assessing their temporary shelter. To Sarah's relief, a hand pump well stood behind the cabin, still functional after some priming. The water ran clear and cold after the initial rusty flow. Inside, they continued cleaning. Emma tackled the small kitchen area, while Liam explored the loft space. Zoe stayed close to Sarah, helping sweep decades of dust from the floors. "Mum, look." Zoe pointed to something glinting in the debris near the fireplace. Sarah knelt down to find a small, ornate key partially buried in ash and dust. "It's pretty." Sarah examined the tarnished brass key, its head decorated with an intricate leaf pattern. "Maybe it opens the trunk," Liam exclaimed, scrambling down from the loft ladder. Sarah hesitated. "This isn't our property, Liam. We shouldn't pry." "But nobody's been here in forever." Emma joined them, wiping dust from her hands. "And we need to know more about this place if we're staying here temporarily." Sarah weighed their situation. They needed shelter, and understanding more about the cabin might help them locate its owner. With reluctance, she approached the trunk and slipped the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease. The lid creaked open, revealing neatly organized contents protected by a layer of oilcloth. Sarah carefully lifted out the items: leather-bound journals, yellowed maps, and a folded document that appeared to be a property deed. "Whoa," Liam breathed, leaning over her shoulder. Sarah opened the topmost journal, finding neat handwriting on the first page. "Property of Eleanor Whitman, 1952. She turned to the first entry, April 12, 1952. "The cabin is more dilapidated than I remembered from childhood visits, but these walls are mine alone. After 15 years of a marriage that slowly erased me, I finally found the courage to leave. James will be furious when he discovers I've fled to my grandfather's old hunting cabin. But he always considered this land worthless, too remote, too wild. Its very worthlessness is my salvation." "She lived here alone?" Emma asked, reading over Sarah's shoulder. "Sounds like she was escaping something too," Sarah murmured. She set aside the journal and examined the deed. The faded document appeared to grant ownership of not just the cabin, but significant surrounding acreage to Eleanor's grandfather, Alexander Whitman, dated. "Are there any Whitmans still in town?" Emma asked. "I don't know. We'll need to find out." Sarah carefully refolded the deed, Liam had opened another journal. Listen to this. I've hidden my treasure where only the deserving will find it. Let the forest keep my secrets until they're needed. Treasure. Zoe's eyes widened. Like gold and jewels? Probably just sentimental items. Sarah tempered their expectations while fighting her own curiosity. Emma remained skeptical. We should put everything back. This is private. I don't think Eleanor would mind, Zoe said softly. When everyone turned to her, she shrugged. She feels nice. Feels nice? Sarah repeated. I can feel her here. She's happy we found her special key. Sarah and Emma exchanged concerned glances, but Liam nodded enthusiastically. It does feel different in here since we opened the trunk. Warmer. Sarah touched Zoe's forehead, checking for fever. Normal. You have a vivid imagination, sweetie. It's not imagination, Zoe insisted quietly. As evening approached, Sarah prepared a meager dinner from their dwindling supplies. Tomorrow they'd need to venture into town for food and information. With the children finally asleep in the loft, Liam and Zoe excited by the adventure, Emma still concerned about trespassing, Sarah returned to Eleanor's journals. By candlelight she began reading from the beginning, finding herself drawn into the life of a woman who, 70 years earlier, had also sought refuge in these same walls. Outside, wind whispered through ancient trees, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace, as if the cabin itself welcomed them. The cabin grew silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. Sarah drew Eleanor's journal closer to the candle's flickering light. May 3, 1952. The first weeks have been harder than I imagined. My hands, soft from years as a banker's wife, are now calloused and split. I've learned to chop wood, haul water, and patch this cabin's many gaps. James always said I was too delicate for real work. How satisfying to prove him wrong, even with no one to witness but the whippoorwills and owls. Sarah flexed her own office-softened hands. She'd need that same determination. June 15, 1952. Ventured into Pine Haven today. The stares followed me everywhere. A woman alone is always suspect, but a woman who's left her husband is practically criminal. The general store owner, Mr. Porter, was kind enough, though his wife whispered behind my back. I purchased only essentials, flour, salt, coffee. My garden sprouts show promise. The fishing lessons from grandfather as a girl have proven invaluable. Sarah continued reading, drawn deeper into Eleanor's life. The parallels between their situations were striking. Both women suddenly on their own with uncertain futures. But Eleanor had chosen her isolation, while Sarah's had been thrust upon her. August 28, 1952. James finally tracked me down, arrived in his polished car, looking so out of place against these woods. He demanded I return to my senses and my home. When I refused, he grew ugly with threats. Said he'd declare me mentally unfit, have me committed. I stood my ground. This cabin has given me strength I never knew I possessed. When he finally left, I reinforced my doors and windows. This sanctuary must remain protected. Sarah glanced instinctively toward the door. The isolation that had seemed threatening now felt protective. December 12, 1952. Winter has wrapped the cabin in silence and snow. I've stored enough food and firewood to last until spring. The townspeople have gradually accepted my presence, though I remain that strange Whitman woman. Little do they know what I discovered in grandfather's old papers. The true ownership of lands throughout this valley has been manipulated and stolen. The Blackwood timber fortune is built on forgery and fraud. This evidence is my insurance, and perhaps my purpose. Sarah straightened, suddenly alert. Land disputes could explain why the cabin had been abandoned. She flipped forward through several entries. April 30, 1953. 1 year in my sanctuary. I've begun creating a series of clues and hiding places for my documentation. Should anything happen to me, the truth must survive. I cannot trust the local authorities, too many are in Blackwood's pocket. But someday, someone will need this evidence. Someone who needs this cabin as desperately as I did. The journal entries continued, documenting Eleanor's transformation from society wife to self-sufficient woman. She'd learned to hunt, preserve food, and even build simple furniture. Her isolation had become independence. Sarah closed the journal, mind racing. Had Eleanor created some sort of treasure hunt? And what exactly was this evidence she kept mentioning? A sound outside made her stiffen, footsteps on the porch. Sarah quickly extinguished the candle and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the grime. A man in hiking gear stood on the porch, flashlight beams sweeping across the cabin's exterior, not threatening, just surprised by signs of habitation. Sarah opened the door cautiously. "Oh," the hiker jumped. "Sorry to disturb you. I didn't realize anyone was living here. We're just staying temporarily," Sarah explained, keeping her voice low to avoid waking the children. Car broke down nearby. The man nodded but looked uncertain. "I've hiked these woods for years. Never seen anyone at the old Whitman place. Folks say it's haunted." "Haunted?" "Eleanor Whitman disappeared from here back in the 50s. Some say she still walks these woods." He shrugged apologetically. "Just local legend. You folks need any help? I can call a tow truck when I get back to town." "That would be kind, thank you." Sarah provided details about their car. After the hiker left, Sarah couldn't return to sleep. She examined the cabin with new eyes, trying to spot anything that might serve as a clue in Eleanor's mystery. The structure itself seemed surprisingly sound for its age. The roof didn't leak despite years of neglect. The stone fireplace was expertly constructed. Even the wells still functioned perfectly. Eleanor, or someone, had built this place to last. Sarah ran her hand along the mantelpiece, feeling slight indentations. Looking closer, she found a pattern of small carved leaves matching the design on the key. Not random decoration, but deliberate markers. Whatever Eleanor had hidden, she'd intended for it to be found by the right person. And somehow Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that person might be her. The next morning, Sarah unfolded a faded map she'd found tucked in the back of Eleanor's journal. Yellowed with age, it showed Pine Haven and surrounding areas, with several locations marked with small stars. One star, the cabin, was circled. The others remained mysterious. "We need supplies," Sarah announced as the children finished their meager breakfast. "I'm going into town. I'm coming with you," Emma insisted, crossing her arms. "Someone needs to watch Liam and Zoe. I'm 16, not 6. And you don't know anything about this place." Emma's stance made clear this wasn't negotiable. Sarah relented. "Fine. Liam, you're in charge here. Lock the door, don't wander off, and don't talk to strangers," Liam finished with a dramatic eye roll. "We'll be fine, Mom." Zoe looked apprehensive. "What if the cabin lady comes back while you're gone?" "Eleanor?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter. "Honey, Eleanor lived here a long time ago, but I heard her last night. She was humming in the kitchen." Emma and Sarah exchanged concerned glances. "Your imagination is working overtime," Sarah said gently. "We'll be back before lunch." Following the path to the road, Sarah and Emma found their car where they'd left it. The walk to Pine Haven took nearly 40 minutes. The town emerged from the morning mist like a postcard from the past. A single main street lined with brick buildings, American flags hanging from lampposts, and a central square dominated by a white gazebo. "It's like we time-traveled," Emma muttered. People noticed them immediately, small-town awareness of strangers. Some nodded politely, others stared openly. Sarah clutched her purse containing their dwindling cash and approached a store with Porter's General Merchandise painted on the window. The bell jingled as they entered. An elderly woman looked up from the counter. "Morning, haven't seen you folks before." "We're just passing through," Sarah replied, "collecting essential groceries. Our car broke down yesterday. Where are you staying?" The woman's tone was conversational but probing. Sarah hesitated. "We found shelter in an old cabin in the woods." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "The Whitman place. Nobody's lived there for decades." "We noticed It was emergency shelter only. I'm Mabel Porter. The woman extended her hand. My father ran this store when Eleanor Whitman was around. Sarah Matthews. This is my daughter, Emma. Mabel nodded thoughtfully. Strange coincidence. You remind me of her a bit. Eleanor? Strong-willed, independent-looking. Mabel smiled. Not many women came to these parts alone back then, or now for that matter. The bell jingled again as a man in a sheriff's uniform entered. Morning, Mabel. Sheriff Miller. Meet Sarah and Emma Matthews. Their car broke down, and they've been staying at the old Whitman cabin. The sheriff's friendly expression shifted to concern. That property isn't safe for habitation, ma'am. We're managing fine, Sarah responded. We'll move on once our car is fixed. That might be a problem. The sheriff removed his hat. Hiker reported your situation. I checked your vehicle this morning. Engine's shot. You'll need parts that have to be ordered. How long? Sarah asked, stomach sinking. Week, maybe 2. Simmons' garage is backed up. Emma's posture stiffened beside her mother. You can't stay at that cabin, the sheriff continued. It's not up to code, and technically you're trespassing. We don't have money for a motel, Sarah admitted. The conversation halted as the store door opened again. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Harrison, Mabel acknowledged coolly. Mabel. The man nodded before turning curious eyes to Sarah. New faces in town. Harrison Blackwood, the sheriff explained, owns Blackwood Timber and most of the land around here. These folks broke down and took shelter in the old Whitman cabin. Blackwood's expression hardened. That's my property. Your property? Sarah questioned before she could stop herself. The Whitman tract was absorbed into my holdings years ago. Tax auction. Nobody's maintained that eyesore in decades. Something in his tone sparked defiance in Sarah. The cabin is in surprisingly good condition, considering its age. Nevertheless, it's not available for squatters. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff, I trust you'll ensure these people find appropriate accommodations elsewhere. After Blackwood left, Mabel shook her head. Don't mind him. Blackwoods have run this town for generations, and Harrison thinks that makes him royalty. We really don't have anywhere else to go, Sarah admitted quietly. Mabel studied her for a long moment. Tell you what, I need help around the store. Previous assistant left for college. Job comes with the apartment upstairs. Small but clean. Really? Sarah could hardly believe their luck. Part-time to start. See if we suit each other. Mabel glanced at Emma. Your daughter can help too when she's not in school. I don't know how to thank you. No need. Always had a soft spot for the Whitman place. Mabel's eyes twinkled mysterious, though you might want to collect your things soon before Harrison sends someone to check. As they left the store with supplies and unexpected hope, Sheriff Miller followed them out. Free advice. Whatever you do, get proper documentation. Blackwood doesn't let things go easily, especially land. Sarah nodded, thinking of Eleanor's journals and the property deed hidden in the trunk. Perhaps there was more to this situation than a simple case of trespassing. The county records office occupied a corner of Pine Haven's modest town hall, a single room with filing cabinets lining the walls and the perpetual scent of old paper. Sarah had left the children with Mabel, who'd shown them the small apartment above the store that would temporarily be theirs. Can I help you? A bespectacled clerk looked up from a computer that seemed jarringly modern against the vintage surroundings. I'm researching property records, Sarah explained. For a cabin on the old Whitman land. The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. The Whitman property that's been in legal limbo for decades. Legal limbo? Eleanor Whitman disappeared in 1957. No body found, no will probated. The property went to tax auction in the 80s. But there were complications. What kind of complications? The clerk glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, despite the empty room. Missing documentation. Boundary disputes. The county's supervisor at the time, a Blackwood associate, pushed the sale through anyway. Then environmental protections were established for part of the land, further complicating matters. So who legally owns the cabin now? That's the question, isn't it? The clerk adjusted his glasses. Officially, the Blackwood Timber Corporation claimed most of the Whitman tract, but the cabin itself sits in a grey area near the protected watershed boundary. Not technically buildable land anymore. So if someone were living there, they'd be trespassing according to Blackwood. But the counties never formally transferred the deed for that specific parcel. The clerk gave her a curious look. Why the interest? Before Sarah could formulate a response, a young man in a rumpled suit entered. Thomas, perfect timing. The clerk beckoned him over. This lady has questions about the Whitman property. Really? The young man's interest visibly piqued. Thomas Reed. I clerk for Judge Anderson, but property law is my specialty. Sarah Matthews. My children and I came across the old cabin recently. Thomas's eyes lit up. The Whitman case is fascinating from a legal perspective, one of the few properties Blackwood couldn't fully secure despite decades of trying. I found what looks like an original deed in the cabin, Sarah said carefully. Thomas and the clerk exchanged significant glances. You've been inside? Sarah nodded. Our car broke down nearby. We needed shelter. And you found documents. In an old trunk, property papers from 1897. Journals from the 1950s. Thomas looked around before lowering his voice. Those could be important. The missing Whitman documentation has been a local legal mystery for years. Important how? Have you heard of adverse possession? When Sarah shook her head, he continued, it's a legal doctrine that allows someone to claim ownership of property if they openly occupy and improve it for a certain period, even without initial permission. How long a period? In this state, 7 years with color of title, meaning you have some documentation suggesting ownership, even if it's not conclusive. Without documentation, it's 20 years. Sarah's mind, but Eleanor's original deed could potentially constitute color of title for whoever possesses it now. Thomas looked at her meaningfully, especially if combined with actual occupancy and improvement of the property. Blackwood would fight it, the clerk interjected. He's been trying to consolidate that land for a commercial development project. The environmental protections complicate that, Thomas countered. And unresolved questions about the original auction's validity would make any court case interesting. He handed Sarah his card. If you're serious about this, I'd like to see those documents. Later, as Sarah walked back to Mabel's store, she pondered Thomas's parting words. Properties sometimes find their rightful owners through unexpected channels. Eleanor Whitman was known for playing the long game. The possibility of legitimate claim to the cabin seemed far-fetched. Yet Eleanor's journals suggested she deliberately created a path for someone to follow. Someone like Sarah. At the store, she found her children helping Mabel stock shelves, even Emma, whose perpetual teenage skepticism had temporarily yielded to the novelty of small-town life. How was the records office? Mabel asked, offering Sarah coffee. Interesting. I met a lawyer named Tommy Reed. Good boy. Smart as they come, but stubborn about justice. Mabel smiled. His grandfather was the only attorney in town who wouldn't take Blackwood retainers. He mentioned adverse possession laws. Mabel's eyes twinkled. Did he now? Sounds like you made quite an impression. That evening, after settling the children in the small but clean apartment, Sarah spread Eleanor's papers across the kitchen table. The deed, the journals, the map with its mysterious stars, all pieces of a puzzle Eleanor had left behind. A plan began forming in Sarah's mind. The cabin represented more than temporary shelter. It offered a potential fresh start, a home they could legally claim as their own. The process would take time and perseverance. But Eleanor's journals had already taught her the value of both. Tomorrow they would return to the cabin with Thomas Reed. Today they had hope, a resource that had been in short supply since the termination letter had arrived 2 weeks ago. The old wood stove dominated the cabin's kitchen area, its cast-iron surface dulled by decades of neglect. Thomas Reed crouched beside it, inspecting the flue. Structurally sound, he declared. Just needs a good cleaning and some minor repairs. Sarah nodded, making mental notes. After showing Thomas Eleanor's documents and receiving his cautiously optimistic legal assessment, they'd agreed on a strategy: occupy and improve the property while he researched the complicated legal history. "If you're serious about pursuing adverse possession," Thomas explained, standing and dusting off his hands, "you need to establish permanent residence and make visible improvements. The fact that the cabin sits on a parcel with unclear ownership actually works in your favor. And Blackwood will likely challenge you," Thomas frowned. "But he doesn't have clear title to this specific parcel. The environmental boundary disputes from the 90s created a old gray area he's never resolved." After Thomas left, promising to file initial paperwork, the real work began. The family divided tasks. Emma, initially resistant, was assigned to cleaning the interior. Liam enthusiastically took inventory of repairs needed. Zoe collected kindling for the fireplace, and Sarah tackled the wood stove. "This is pointless," Emma muttered, vigorously scrubbing decades of grime from windows. "We're going to fix up this place just to have some rich guy kick us out." "Thomas thinks we have a case," Sarah replied, scouring rust from the stove's surface. "A lawyer who probably hasn't won a case against Blackwood ever." "Sometimes you have to take chances, Emma, like you did with Dad." The words hung between them, sharp and unexpected. Sarah paused. "Your father left us. This situation is different, is it? We had stability before. Now we're squatting in a haunted cabin, betting everything on some ancient paperwork." Before Sarah could respond, Liam burst through the door. "Mom, I found something cool." He dragged them outside to the overgrown garden where he'd discovered the remnants of a rainwater collection system. Eleanor mentions this in her journal. Sarah realized she designed it herself. Even Emma seemed impressed. Smart lady, days melted into a rhythm of renovation and discovery. They cleared debris, patched the roof, and reclaimed the garden from wilderness. Sarah worked mornings at Mabel's store and spent afternoons at the cabin. The stove became her personal project, disassembling, wire brushing, and resealing its components until it gleamed with renewed purpose. A week into their efforts, Emma discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose baseboard. "Mom," she called, "there's something here." The family gathered as she extracted a small leather pouch containing hand-drawn blueprints of the cabin with notations in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. "Look," Liam pointed to markings on the kitchen wall. "Secret passages." "Not passages," Sarah corrected, studying the blueprints. "Concealed storage." Following Eleanor's drawings, they located 5 hidden compartments throughout the cabin. 2 were empty. One contained preserved seeds, labeled in Eleanor's hand. Another held tools, and the last concealed a small metal box with photographs of the cabin and surrounding land from the... "She really thought of everything," Sarah murmured, carefully examining the photos that documented the original condition of the property, valuable evidence for their adverse possession claim. Zoe, who had been quieter than usual, suddenly spoke. "She's happy we're fixing her home." "Eleanor?" Sarah asked gently. Zoe nodded. "She shows me where things are supposed to go." Instead of dismissing her daughter's imagination, Sarah found herself asking, "What else does she tell you? That we belong here? That she was waiting for us?" Emma rolled her eyes, but Sarah noticed her daughter worked with increased determination afterward. The refurbished wood stove became the heart of the cabin. One evening, as it radiated warmth against the autumn chill, Sarah prepared their first real meal in their new home: vegetable soup and fresh bread, courtesy of Mabel's generosity with store supplies. "It's starting to feel like a home," Liam observed, helping set the table they'd repaired. "A temporary home," Emma corrected, though with less conviction than before. "Our home for now," Sarah compromised, ladling soup into mismatched bowls. After dinner, with the children asleep in the newly cleaned loft, Sarah continued reading Eleanor's journals by the stove's warm glow. One passage particularly resonated. "Home isn't given, it's created. Each repair, each improvement, each moment of care embeds your spirit into these walls. I wasn't born to this cabin, but I've made it mine through persistence and love. Perhaps someday, someone else will need this sanctuary as desperately as I did. To them, I leave not just shelter, but possibility. Outside, an expensive SUV drove slowly past the cabin, its headlights briefly illuminating the interior. Sarah recognized Harrison Blackwood's silhouette behind the wheel. Their improvements hadn't gone unnoticed. The real challenge was just beginning. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the cabin, clearing as Liam attacked the overgrown garden with enthusiasm. 3 weeks had passed since they'd begun renovations, and the cabin was slowly transforming from abandoned relic to functional home. "Mom," Liam's excited voice carried from behind the cabin. "I found something weird." Sarah set aside the window frame she'd been repainting and joined her son. He stood proudly beside a shallow hole, holding up a smooth stone about the size of his palm. "Look at the carvings," he said, brushing away dirt to reveal intricate symbols etched into the stone's surface. Sarah took it carefully. The markings weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern of curves and angles, almost like a primitive map. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Right here, about 6 inches down. I was digging to plant those raspberry canes Mabel gave us." Sarah studied the stone, a memory stirring. She'd seen these symbols before, in one of Eleanor's journals. Inside, she retrieved the journal and flipped through until she found the entry from June 1954. "I've begun implementing my contingency plan. The first marker is placed in the garden, where wildflowers will disguise its presence. The symbols match the map in grandfather's survey book, directions only the worthy will recognize. Should anything happen to me, the evidence must survive." "What is it, Mom?" Emma asked, looking up from her schoolwork spread across the kitchen table. Despite her initial resistance, she'd enrolled in the local high school, adapting to rural education with surprising grace. "I think Liam found one of Eleanor's clues." "Clues to what?" "Her treasure," Sarah replied, showing Emma the journal entry. Zoe appeared from the loft, where she'd been arranging wildflowers in mason jars. "The lady said we'd find it soon." Emma's expression softened toward her younger sister. Though she never admitted believing in Zoe's cabin lady, she'd stopped openly challenging the girl's claims. "Can we look for the next clue now?" Liam bounced with excitement. Sarah studied the stone's markings more carefully. "These could be directions or coordinates of some kind." "Or a code," Emma suggested, unexpected interest lighting her features. She reached for the stone. "May I?" Sarah handed it over, pleased by her daughter's engagement. Emma had been increasingly invested in the cabin project, though she maintained a facade of detachment. "These symbols," Emma mused, tracing them with her finger. "They're not random. There's a pattern here." They gathered around the kitchen table, spreading out Eleanor's journals, the property maps, and the carved stone. What had begun as Liam's discovery evolved into a family project, deciphering Eleanor's message. "Listen to this entry," Sarah read aloud from a later journal. "The path begins where life emerges anew each spring, follows where water once flowed, and rests where shadows never fade. The garden is where life emerges," Liam reasoned, "and where water once flowed could be the old creek bed behind the cabin," Emma added, warming to the puzzle. They compared the stone's markings to the property maps, finding subtle correspondences. One symbol matched a distinctive bend in the creek. Another resembled the peculiar formation of rocks near the property's eastern boundary. "It's a treasure hunt," Liam declared, eyes bright with adventure. "Like Eleanor made it just for us. She probably created it for whoever found the cabin." Sarah tempered his enthusiasm. "But yes, it seems she left a trail to something important. The evidence she mentions," Emma noted. "About the Blackwoods." Sarah nodded. "She was documenting something. Thomas believes it could help our legal case." As evening approached, they decided to follow the first set of directions the next day. Zoe set the stone on the mantelpiece, arranging her wildflowers around it like a shrine. "The lady is happy we found her special stone," she whispered. Later, after the children were asleep, Sarah noticed headlights approaching through the trees. Sheriff Miller's patrol car pulled up beside the cabin. Her stomach tightened as she went outside to meet him. "Evening, Sarah," he said, tipping his hat. "Place is looking better. We've been working hard. I can see that." He glanced around appreciatively before his expression grew serious. "Wanted to give you a heads up. Blackwood filed a formal complaint about trespassers on his property. Thomas Reed says this parcel has disputed ownership. That may be, but Blackwood has influence with the county commissioners. Just watch yourself." Miller hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Eleanor Whitman didn't just disappear. There were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That she had evidence of wrongdoing involving the Blackwood family. Some said that's why she vanished." He shrugged uncomfortably. "Just old town gossip, probably." After Miller left, Sarah returned to Eleanor's journals with renewed purpose. Reading deep into the night, one entry from Eleanor's final year sent a chill through her. "I've completed my contingency plan. The evidence is secure, hidden where only the deserving will find it. If anything happens to me, follow the markers. The truth will outlive us all." Outside the window, a familiar SUV drove slowly past the cabin, its driver barely visible in the darkness. Harrison Blackwood was watching, waiting for them to make a mistake, or perhaps to find whatever Eleanor had hidden all those years ago. Mabel's general store hummed with mid-morning activity as Sarah restocked the canned goods section. 1 month into her employment, she'd settled into the rhythm of small-town commerce, the regular customers, the predictable rush before noon, the gossip exchanged over shopping baskets. "Sarah," Mabel called from behind the counter. "Come meet someone." Sarah approached to find Mabel with an elderly woman whose weathered hands were busy arranging a patchwork quilt across the counter. "This is Irene Holloway," Mabel introduced. "Makes the finest quilts in 3 counties and remembers everyone who's passed through Pine Haven since the flood." Irene chuckled. "Not quite that old, Mabel." She extended a hand to Sarah. "Heard you're fixing up the Whitman place. Brave undertaking." "It's coming along," Sarah replied, shaking the woman's hand. "We found some interesting things." "I imagine so." Eleanor was resourceful. Something in Irene's tone suggested deeper meaning. "Did you know her?" Sarah asked. "Everyone knew of her. Few knew her." Irene smoothed the quilt with practiced hands. "I was young when she disappeared. Remember the search parties combing those woods for weeks. They never found her?" Irene shook her head. "Some said she simply left, tired of fighting Blackwood Sr. over the land. Others thought more sinister things. Either way, she was gone, just like that." After Irene left, Mabel folded the quilt carefully. "Irene hosts a women's circle every Thursday evening. You should come." "I couldn't impose." "Nonsense. Been going 30 years myself. Good company, good conversation." Mabel winked. "Might hear things about Pine Haven you won't find in official records." That afternoon, Emma stopped by the store after school, a library book tucked under her arm. "Made some friends at the library," she reported, helping herself to an apple from the produce section. "Mrs. Carlton's letting me use the historical archives for a school project." "What project?" Sarah asked, surprised by her daughter's initiative. "Local history." Emma shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "Thought researching the Whitman property might help our case." Sarah hid a smile at this admission that Emma had fully joined their cause. "That's thoughtful of you." "It's just practical," Emma insisted. "Oh, and Liam and Zoe's teacher asked if they could join the fall nature program. It's after school on Tuesdays. They're fitting in well then." Emma nodded. "Zoe's basically the class pet since she knows all these weird plants from Eleanor's journal, and Liam's making friends with his treasure hunt stories." That evening, Sarah witnessed this integration firsthand when she picked the younger children up from school. Zoe was surrounded by classmates, showing them how to weave grass into simple baskets, a skill she claimed the cabin lady had taught her. Liam stood with 2 boys his age, gesturing excitedly toward the woods, undoubtedly elaborating on their treasure hunt. "Miss Matthews," a woman in a cardigan approached. I'm Patricia Donahue, Liam and Zoe's teacher. Your children have brought such wonderful energy to our class. They seem to be enjoying it. Liam's stories about your cabin restoration have inspired our local history unit. Would you consider having the class visit sometime? Many of these children have heard stories about the Whitman place their whole lives, but never seen it. The request startled Sarah. We're still renovating. That's perfect. They can see preservation in action. Donahue's enthusiasm was hard to resist. It would mean so much to them. Sarah found herself agreeing to a class visit the following month. As she gathered her children to leave, she noticed Harrison Blackwood's luxury SUV parked across from the school, his imperious figure watching them from behind tinted windows. On Thursday evening, with Emma watching the younger children, Sarah attended Mabel's Women's Circle. 8 women of varying ages gathered in Irene's cozy living room, the promised quilt draped ceremoniously across a frame in the center. Each woman adds a piece, Mabel explained, as Sarah admired the intricate community quilt. Been working on this one since spring. It's for the family who lost their home in the creek flooding. The evening progressed with comfortable conversation, local updates, and gentle humor. Sarah felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since before her firing, the simple pleasure of adult company without judgment. As the gathering wound down, Irene approached Sarah privately. "Meant to give you this," she said, pressing a small fabric pouch into Sarah's hand. "Found it among my mother's things. Think it belongs at the cabin." Later, alone in Mabel's apartment, Sarah opened the pouch to find a small silver thimble engraved with delicate leaves identical to the pattern on the key that had opened Eleanor's trunk. "She made friends here," Mabel commented, seeing Sarah's discovery. Despite what some thought of her, Eleanor touched lives, left pieces of herself with those who showed kindness. Sarah added the thimble to their growing collection of Eleanor's artifacts, increasingly certain that the woman had created not just a treasure hunt, but a community network, connections that had survived decades after her disappearance. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting Pine Haven's rooftops with white. In the gentle silence, Sarah felt something she hadn't dared acknowledge in weeks: the tentative roots of belonging. The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Sheriff Miller with an apologetic expression. Sarah stood on the cabin's newly repaired porch, reading the formal language with growing dismay. "This can't be right," she said, looking up at Miller. "We've been here almost 2 months. Thomas Reed said. Thomas is a good lawyer, but he's young." Miller removed his hat. "Blackwoods filed for emergency eviction, claiming unsafe habitation and trespassing on private property. Hearings set for next month, but this preliminary order gives you 30 days to vacate." 30 days? But it's nearly winter. Where would we go? "I'm sorry, Sarah. Court orders binding until the hearing." He shifted uncomfortably. "Between us, Blackwood seemed mighty interested in how much renovation you've done. Almost like he was waiting for you to improve the property before making his move." After Miller left, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, the eviction notice clutched in her hand. The family had poured everything into the cabin: their limited funds, their physical labor, their hopes for a fresh start. Now it could all be taken away with a stroke of a judge's pen. When Thomas Reed arrived that evening, his normally confident demeanor was subdued. "Blackwood pulled strings with Judge Harmon," he explained, pacing the cabin's main room. "Claimed the environmental protections on the watershed make your occupancy a potential contamination risk." "That's ridiculous," Sarah protested. "We've been meticulous about waste management and water conservation." "It's a legal tactic, not a genuine concern." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "He's also challenging the validity of Eleanor's deed, claiming subsequent tax sales supersede it." "Can he do that?" "He's trying. I've filed counter motions, but—" He hesitated. "Sarah, I should warn you. Blackwood doesn't lose local cases. His family's influence runs deep." The children reacted differently to the news. Liam immediately suggested hiding in the woods, like Eleanor would have done. Zoe grew quiet, whispering to empty corners of the cabin, as if consulting an unseen advisor. It was Emma's response, that surprised Sarah most. "We can't give up," her daughter insisted, a steely determination in her eyes that Sarah had never seen before. "This is our home now. We've earned it." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah spread Eleanor's documents across the kitchen table. There had to be something they were missing, some legal protection Eleanor had established before her disappearance. A knock at the door startled her. Thomas Reed stood outside, looking troubled. "Sorry for the late visit," he apologized, "but I found something you should know." He placed a folder on the table, opening it to reveal photocopied court records from the night. Eleanor Whitman filed injunctions against Blackwood Timber 3 times between 1954 and 1956. Each case alleged fraudulent land acquisition practices, but all were dismissed for lack of evidence. He tapped the documents. The interesting part is what happened after each dismissal. Eleanor would disappear for weeks, then return with new documentation. She was gathering evidence, building her case methodically, until she disappeared completely in 1957, Sarah concluded. Thomas nodded gravely. The timing suggests she either found conclusive evidence or was prevented from presenting it, Sarah finished, a chill running through her. "Either way, I believe what she found is what you're meant to find through her clues." Thomas gathered the papers, "But we're running out of time." The next morning, Emma burst into Mabel's store, where Sarah was working. "Mom, we need to find the treasure, now." She thrust a library book before Sarah. "I found an article about Eleanor. The day before she disappeared, she told the general store owner, Mabel's father, that she had finally secured the truth, where only the worthy would find it." Sarah glanced at Mabel, who nodded confirmation. "Dad always believed something happened to her," Mabel said said she was too determined to just walk away. That evening, the family gathered around the kitchen table for a council of war. Emma had created a detailed map combining Eleanor's journal clues with the symbols from the stone. Liam reported their exploration of the creek bed had revealed markings on certain trees that matched patterns in Eleanor's journal. "We need to focus on finding the second major clue," Sarah decided. "The stone pointed us to the creek, and Eleanor's journal mentioned where shadows never fade." "The old well," Zoe said suddenly, looking up from her drawing. "That's what she told me to tell you." "Eleanor told you about the well?" Sarah asked gently. Zoe nodded solemnly. "She says it's important to hurry. The bad man is getting closer." Sarah exchanged glances with Emma, whose skepticism had yielded to practical urgency. "The well is on the north side of the property," Emma confirmed. "We haven't explored it thoroughly yet." "Then that's our next step," Sarah decided, folding up the eviction notice and placing it in a drawer. "Whatever Eleanor hid, we need to find it before we're forced to leave." Outside, the wind carried the sound of an engine idling before fading into the distance. Someone was watching the cabin. The race against time had begun. Dawn mist clung to the ground as the family gathered around the old well. Constructed of fitted stones and capped with a wooden cover, it stood at the edge of the clearing behind the cabin. Sarah had brought ropes, flashlights, and Thomas Reed, who'd arrived early to assist with their exploration. "Are you sure about this?" Thomas asked, examining the well structure. "These old wells can be dangerous." "Zoe's certain," Sarah replied, watching her youngest daughter run her small hands along the stones, searching for something only she seemed to understand. "Here," Zoe announced, pointing to a stone with a barely visible leaf pattern etched into its surface. Eleanor marked it. Thomas helped Sarah remove the well cover. Flashlight beams penetrated the darkness, revealing water about 30 feet below. The stone walls disappeared into murky depths. "I don't see anything unusual," Emma commented, peering down. "There's a ledge," Liam pointed out, directing his flashlight. "About halfway down. See how the stones jut out there?" He was right. About 15 feet down, the well's circumference widened slightly, creating a narrow shelf around its perimeter. "Could be a natural formation," Thomas suggested, "or deliberate design for well maintenance." "Or hiding something," Sarah added. "The question is how to reach it safely." After careful consideration, they devised a plan. Liam, the lightest and most agile, would be lowered on a rope harness, while Thomas and Sarah anchored him from above. Emma would manage the flashlights and communication. "I want to help too," Zoe insisted. "You already have," Sarah assured her. "You found Eleanor's mark." Preparing Liam took time, testing the rope's strength, creating a secure harness and establishing clear signals. Despite his eagerness, Sarah saw fear flicker in his eyes. "You don't have to do this," she told him quietly. "I want to," he replied with determined bravery. "Eleanor left clues for people like us. I can do this." The descent began slowly. Sarah and Thomas carefully paid out rope as Liam disappeared into the well. Emma directed her flashlight, providing visibility, while Zoe watched with unusual stillness, as if listening to an inaudible voice. "I'm at the ledge," Liam called up, his voice echoing. "It's wider than it looked. Almost like a... Wait, there's something here. What do you see?" Sarah called down. "There's a gap in the stones, like a small chamber built into the well wall." Excitement colored his voice. "I need to reach inside." Tense minutes passed as they heard Liam's movements below. Sarah held her breath, imagining all the things that could go wrong. The rope breaking, the ledge crumbling, her son falling into the dark water. "I found something." Liam's triumphant shout finally came. "It's some kind of metal box." Retrieving Liam and his discovery proved easier than the descent. When he emerged, dirt-smudged but beaming with pride, he clutched a metal ammunition box, its surface protected by a waterproof wrapping. Inside the cabin, they carefully opened their prize. The box contained an antique brass compass, its surface engraved with the now familiar leaf pattern, and a waterproof packet of papers, additional journal pages written in Eleanor's hand. "These are different from her personal journals," Sarah noted, carefully examining the brittle pages. "These look like formal documentation," Thomas read over her shoulder. "Land surveys, property descriptions, and look, notarized statements about property boundaries." Emma spread the pages carefully on the table. "There are references to fraudulent adjustments of property lines by Blackwood that would be Harrison's grandfather. Eleanor's husband was a land assessor," Sarah remembered from earlier journal entries. "He must have had access to official records." The compass drew Liam's attention. Unlike ordinary compasses, it had additional markings around its circumference, symbols that matched those on the carved stone. "It's a decoder," he realized, comparing the patterns. "The stone shows where to look, and the compass helps read the directions." "There's more," Thomas said gravely, holding up a final document. A signed confession from William Turner, former county clerk, admitting he falsified property records at James Blackwood's direction. Dated October 1956, 1 month before Eleanor disappeared. "Proof of fraud," Sarah whispered. "This is what she was collecting, but not enough," Thomas cautioned. "This confession alone wouldn't overturn 70 years of property claims. There must be more substantial evidence. The final piece of her treasure," Emma concluded. "Which we still need to find," Sarah added, checking the eviction countdown on their calendar. "We have 23 days left." As they studied Eleanor's new materials, Zoe sat quietly in the corner, having a whispered conversation with thin air. When she rejoined them, her expression was solemn. "Eleanor says we need to hurry," she reported. "The bad man knows we're looking." "Harrison Blackwood?" Sarah asked. Zoe nodded. "And she says to look where the trees make an X on grandfather's boundary." Thomas raised his eyebrows at Sarah, who shrugged. "We've learned not to dismiss Zoe's insights." Outside the cabin, unnoticed by the family, a small drone hovered briefly near the window before darting away into the trees. Their exploration of the well had not gone unobserved. The Pinehaven Public Library occupied the former town hall, its marble columns and high ceilings lending gravitas to the modest collection of books. In the basement archives, Emma and Sarah hunched over microfiche readers, methodically scanning through decades of local newspapers. "This is it," Emma whispered excitedly, pausing on a headline from 1944. "Blackwood acquires watershed properties for expansion. Sarah leaned closer to read. The article described James Blackwood purchasing abandoned and tax-delinquent properties throughout the valley for a planned timber operation. A quote from Blackwood claimed the acquisitions would revitalize the local economy while preserving the natural character of the region. Look at the list of properties, Emma pointed. The Whitman tract is mentioned specifically, but Eleanor's journals indicate her grandfather's land was fully paid up, Sarah noted. Never tax delinquent. They continued scanning, finding scattered references to property disputes throughout the 1940s. Small landowners had protested Blackwood's acquisitions, claiming their properties weren't abandoned or tax delinquent, but the county had sided with Blackwood consistently. Here's something. Sarah paused on a small notice from 1947. County Assessor James Matthews announces retirement. Eleanor's husband, the man she'd later leave, had worked directly for the county during the questionable property transfers. And look at who replaced him. Emma indicated the final paragraph. William Turner, appointed new county assessor on Blackwood recommendation. The same William Turner who signed the confession we found in the well, Sarah realized. Eleanor's husband must have known about the fraud. Mrs. Carlton, the elderly librarian, approached with a box of dusty files. Found those county commission minutes you requested, she said, placing them on the table. Strange research for a school project. It's more than that now, Emma admitted. We're trying to save our home. Understanding dawned on the librarian's face. The Whitman cabin. Thought that might be it. She glanced around before lowering her voice. You should check the back issues of The Observer from different perspective than the official Pinehaven Chronicle. The Observer proved to be a short-lived independent newspaper, critical of Blackwood's influence. Its final issues from early 1957 contained pointed questions about multiple land transactions, suggesting systematic fraud in property transfers throughout the county. The last issue was published 2 weeks after Eleanor disappeared, Emma noted. Then nothing. Probably not coincidental, Sarah murmured. They returned to the cabin laden with photocopies and notes. Thomas Reed was waiting on the porch, his expression somber. Blackwood's pushing to expedite the eviction, he reported. Claims you're conducting unauthorized excavations that threaten the watershed. He knows we're searching, Sarah realized. But how? Drone, Liam announced, emerging from the trees with Zoe. Found this caught in branches by the well. He held up the mangled remains of a small camera drone. Thomas examined it. High-end surveillance equipment, not your typical hobbyist drone. Inside, they shared their discovery. The library research had revealed a pattern of questionable land acquisitions benefiting Blackwood timber, with Eleanor's husband potentially involved before his conscience or his wife intervened. Eleanor must have discovered what her husband had done, Thomas theorized, connecting the documents, started collecting evidence after leaving him, which made her dangerous to both her ex-husband and the Blackwoods. Sarah added, there's more. Emma spread out a large county survey map from the 1930s, before the Blackwood acquisition. The original property lines are completely different from current records. The Whitman land originally included most of what's now the northern Blackwood estate, including the site of their new development project. Thomas whistled. If we can prove the original boundaries and the fraudulent transfers, we could challenge not just our eviction but Blackwood's entire claim to the northern properties. Sarah finished. But we need the original deeds and surveys. Thomas cautioned. These newspaper accounts support our theory but wouldn't stand up in court against 70 years of recorded ownership. Zoe, who had been quietly drawing at the kitchen table, suddenly spoke up. The boundary marker. That's where she put the important papers. What boundary marker, sweet? Sarah asked. The one where the trees make an X. Zoe replied, as if it were obvious. Eleanor says her grandfather put special rocks to mark his land. The papermen came and moved them, but he knew the real spots. Liam snapped his fingers. The compass, it's not just for directions, it's for finding the original property markers. Thomas looked skeptical, but intrigued. Old property surveys often used natural landmarks and compass bearings. If Alexander Whitman marked his boundaries clearly enough, we might find both the original markers and Eleanor's hidden evidence, Sarah concluded. They spent the remainder of the day plotting potential boundary points based on the 1930s survey map and Eleanor's journals. Using the antique compass and the symbols from the stone as guides, they identified 3 possible locations where original boundary markers might have stood. We'll start searching tomorrow, Sarah decided. First light. As dusk settled over the cabin, Thomas prepared to leave. Be careful, he warned. Blackwood knows you're onto something. That drone wasn't just casual surveillance. After he departed, Sarah watched her children planning the next day's exploration with maps spread across the floor. The eviction threat had transformed them. Emma channeling her intelligence into research, Liam's imagination focused on practical problem-solving, and Zoe's connection to Eleanor accepted without question. They were fighting for their home with every skill they possessed. Sarah only hoped it would be enough. Rain battered the cabin windows, turning the clearing into a muddy swamp. 3 days of relentless downpour had halted their search for boundary markers and confined the family indoors. Tension simmered as the eviction deadline drew closer. 19 days remaining. Sarah stared at the family photograph that had fallen from her wallet, the last picture taken before her ex-husband left. The glass was cracked now, splitting the image across the middle. A fitting metaphor. Any word from Thomas? Emma asked, entering the main room with a stack of Eleanor's journals. Court denied his motion to delay the eviction. Sarah tucked the broken photo away. He's filing an appeal, but we're running out of time, Emma finished flatly. And we can't search in this weather. The disappointment in her daughter's voice triggered something in Sarah, a surge of guilt and self-doubt. I'm sorry I brought you into this mess, she blurted. Maybe we should be looking for another place to live instead of chasing Eleanor's ghosts. Emma looked up sharply. You want to give up? I want what's best for you kids. A stable home, not some legal battle we'll probably lose. This is our home, Emma insisted, her voice rising. We've put everything into it. You can't just quit when things get hard. I'm trying to be realistic. No, you're being a coward. Emma's words landed like a slap, just like with Dad. You didn't fight then either. Sarah recoiled. That was different. Was it? Because it feels exactly the same. Things get tough, and you look for the exit. Emma gathered the journals. Maybe Eleanor picked the wrong family for her treasure. She stormed upstairs to the loft, leaving Sarah stunned by her daughter's outburst. The worst part was the kernel of truth in Emma's accusation. When her marriage had collapsed, Sarah had accepted defeat without a fight, too exhausted by years of emotional neglect to battle for anything beyond child support. Liam and Zoe had witnessed the argument from the kitchen doorway. Zoe retreated to her corner by the window, whispering to her invisible friend. Liam approached Sarah cautiously. We can't give up, Mom, he said, his young face serious. Eleanor picked us special. Oh, honey, she did, he insisted. Zoe talks to her, but I feel her too, like she's watching out for us. Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door banged open as Emma reappeared, rain-soaked and frantic. Liam's gone, she cried. I went to apologize, and he wasn't in the loft. His raincoat's missing. What? Sarah ran to check the back door. It stood ajar, Liam's muddy footprints leading toward the forest. Why would he? He heard us fighting, Zoe said quietly. He told Eleanor he would find the boundary marker himself. Panic surged through Sarah. The woods were treacherous in this weather. Rain-swollen creeks, slippery slopes, limited visibility. Call Sheriff Miller, she ordered Emma, grabbing her own raincoat. Tell him we need help. Then stay with Zoe. I'm coming with you, Emma insisted, already pulling on boots. Absolutely not. I can't risk both of you out there. This is my fault too, Emma's voice broke. Please, Mom. Sarah recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes, the same fierce protection that had emerged when Emma became the de facto second parent after their divorce. Fine, but Zoe stays locked inside. Call Thomas too. They followed Liam's rapidly disappearing tracks into the forest, calling his name. The downpour muffled their voices and limited visibility to mere yards. Direction became meaningless in the green labyrinth. He was heading toward the western boundary, Emma shouted over the rain. Where the old creek meets the ridge. How do you know? He's been studying Eleanor's maps for days, said that's where the trees form an X. They pressed forward, fighting through underbrush and mud. An hour into their search, with daylight fading and hope diminishing, Sheriff Miller's voice crackled over a bullhorn, organizing volunteer searchers from town. We need to split up, Emma suggested. Cover more ground. No, Sarah grabbed her arm. We stay together. Mom, we're running out of daylight. Liam could be hurt. The fear in Emma's voice mirrored Sarah's own. She made a decision. Take this, she handed Emma a flashlight. An emergency whistle. Stay on the ridge trail. I'll follow the creek bed. 3 whistle blasts if you find him. They separated, each fighting their own path through the storm. Sarah slogged along the swollen creek, shouting Liam's name until her voice grew hoarse. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Liam injured, lost, or worse. Just as full darkness threatened, a distant whistle pierced the storm. 3 sharp blasts. Sarah scrambled toward the sound, slipping and falling repeatedly in her desperate rush. She found Emma and Sheriff Miller standing beside a massive oak that had been struck by lightning years ago. Its split trunk formed a perfect X with a neighboring pine that had grown through the gap, and there, huddled in a hollow at the base, was Liam, wet, muddy, but gloriously unharmed. "Mum," he cried, launching into her arms. "I found it. I found Eleanor's marker." In his hand was a carved stone identical to the first clue, uncovered when the lightning-split oak's roots had partially uprooted during the storm. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as the family examined Liam's discoveries. The carved stone, similar to the first but with different markings, had been hidden beneath the lightning-struck oak tree. After Sheriff Miller had helped them home through the storm, Thomas Reed had arrived to join their investigation. "The symbols are definitely coordinating with the compass," Thomas confirmed, aligning Eleanor's antique compass with the stone's markings. "But they're pointing back toward the cabin." "That doesn't make sense," Emma frowned. "Why create clues leading us in a circle?" Sarah studied the pattern carefully. "Not in a circle, to a specific point. The cabin itself must contain the final clue." Renewed purpose energized their search. Using the compass and both carved stones, they triangulated the exact location. Eleanor's clues indicated the stone hearth of the cabin's fireplace. "But we've examined the fireplace thoroughly," Sarah said, running her hands over the fitted stones. "There's nothing hidden there." Zoe, who had been unusually quiet since Liam's adventure, suddenly spoke up. "Not in the fireplace. Under it." All eyes turned to the 8-year-old, who knelt beside the hearth and pressed her small palm against a particular stone adorned with a barely visible leaf carving. "Eleanor says to push here, then pull the iron ring." Thomas raised skeptical eyebrows, but Sarah had learned to trust her daughter's mysterious intuitions. She knelt beside Zoe, located the carved stone, and pressed firmly. A soft click rewarded her effort. "The iron ring?" she prompted. Zoe pointed to an ornamental ring set into another stone, previously assumed to be merely decorative. Sarah grasped it, gave an experimental tug, and gasped as a section of the hearth floor shifted, revealing a small compartment beneath. "A hidden door," Liam exclaimed. Inside the compartment lay a heavy iron key and a folded piece of parchment. The note in Eleanor's now familiar handwriting read, "For those who seek truth with pure hearts. The final threshold lies beneath the heart of the home." Beneath the cabin, Emma wondered, like a cellar. "This cabin doesn't have a cellar," Thomas said. "The foundation is solid stone." "Maybe not the whole cabin," Sarah reasoned. "Just beneath the hearth, the heart of the home." Careful inspection revealed a seam in the floorboards running along the edge of the stone hearth. When pulled, a trapdoor swung upward, exposing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "I'll go first," Sarah insisted, taking a flashlight. Thomas, you follow. Kids, stay up here until we make sure it's safe. The stairs creaked but held firm as Sarah descended into the cool darkness. The beam of her flashlight revealed a small room, perhaps 12 feet square, with a packed earth floor and stone walls. Unlike the damp mustiness she expected, the air smelled surprisingly fresh. Some ventilation system had kept the space habitable. Eleanor created a hidden vault, Thomas whispered, joining her. Ingenious. The room contained a simple wooden table and chair, a wall of built-in shelves, and an old steamer trunk. Every surface was covered with carefully preserved documents, maps, photographs, and ledgers. It's all here, Sarah breathed, examining the nearest shelf. Everything Eleanor collected. Thomas lifted a bound volume from the table. These are original land surveys from the 1890s, when Alexander Whitman first settled this property. And here, he picked up another document, the original deeds, with proper boundary descriptions that match the early survey maps. "Mom, can we come down now?" Liam called from above. "Yes, but be careful on the stairs." The children's excited whispers filled the small space as they explored Eleanor's secret archive. Emma immediately gravitated toward a collection of newspaper clippings and photographs. Liam examined an old surveyor's transit with reverent hand. Zoe simply stood in the center of the room, smiling as if at a private joke. "She's happy we found it," the little girl announced. "She's been waiting a long time." Sarah turned her attention to the steamer trunk, which was secured with a padlock. The iron key from the hearth compartment fit perfectly. Inside, she found the most damning evidence of all: ledgers documenting systematic fraud by James Blackwood, complete with dates, property descriptions, and amounts paid to county officials for falsifying records. Most shocking was a leather-bound journal with James Matthews embossed on the cover, Eleanor's husband's personal record of his role in the scheme, followed by his crisis of conscience. "This is incredible," Thomas murmured, carefully examining the document Sarah handed him. "This proves the Blackwood fortune was built on fraudulently obtained lands. The current property lines are all based on falsified records. Not just the cabin," Emma realized, studying a large map spread across the table. "According to these original documents, nearly half of what's now Blackwood property legally belongs to other families, including the entire northern tract, where they're planning the new development. No wonder Harrison is so determined to evict us," Sarah said. "If this evidence became public, it would trigger the largest property dispute in county history," Thomas finished. "Potentially hundreds of millions in liability for the Blackwood Corporation." Amid the documents, Sarah found a sealed envelope, addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." Inside was Eleanor's will, dated 1 week before her disappearance in 1957. "I, Eleanor Whitman," Sarah read aloud, "being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my property and all improvements thereon to those who need it as I once did. Souls seeking refuge and justice, may they find both within these walls." She left the cabin to whoever found her treasure. Emma whispered, "To us." Thomas carefully collected the most critical documents. "We need to get these to a secure location immediately. Once Blackwood realizes what you've found, he'll stop at nothing to bury the evidence again," Sarah finished grimly. "Just like he or his father did with Eleanor." The Pinehaven County Administration Building buzzed with unusual activity as Sarah and Thomas made their way to the special hearing. News of Eleanor's documents had spread through town despite their efforts at discretion. Community members lined the hallways, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright support. "Remember," Thomas whispered as they approached the meeting chamber, "we're only presenting preliminary findings today. This isn't a court case yet, just a hearing to delay your eviction based on new evidence. But Blackwood will be there with his attorneys, yes." Thomas patted his briefcase. "We have enough to stop the eviction process. The rest will take time." The chamber was packed when they entered. At one table sat Harrison Blackwood, with 2 suits. Sarah assumed were corporate lawyers. Sheriff Miller stood at the back, arms crossed. The 3 county commissioners occupied the raised dais, with Judge Anderson present as a special advisor. Commissioner Taylor, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, called the meeting to order. This emergency session will address new evidence pertaining to property ownership of the former Whitman tract, currently scheduled for eviction proceedings against Sarah Matthews and family. Thomas presented theirs methodically, introducing key documents from Eleanor's collection, while projecting maps and photographs on a screen for all to see. These records establish conclusively that the 1944 tax sale transferring Whitman property to Blackwood Timber was based on falsified assessments, he explained, displaying affidavits and ledgers. Alexander Whitman's taxes were paid in full. The property was never eligible for tax sale. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's attorneys whispered urgently to their client, whose face remained impassive except for a muscle twitching along his jaw. Furthermore, Thomas continued, we have documented evidence of systematic fraud orchestrated by James Blackwood, including signed confessions from county officials who participated in the scheme. Commissioner Daniels, a man in his 60s, leaned forward. These are serious allegations against a family that's been prominent in this county for generations, Mr. Reed. They are serious, and they are thoroughly documented, Thomas replied, nodding to Sarah, who distributed folders to each commissioner. This is absurd, Blackwood finally spoke, his voice controlled but tight. These so-called documents could easily be fabricated. The statute of limitations on any such claims expired decades ago. Fraud has no statute of limitations in this state, Thomas countered, particularly when concealed through continuing acts of deception, as evidenced by the deliberate burial of Eleanor Whitman's archive, which conveniently appeared just when your client faced eviction, Blackwood's attorney interjected. How fortuitous. Sarah stood. Eleanor created a treasure hunt specifically to preserve this evidence until the right person found it. She knew what happened to these lands wasn't just unfair, it was criminal. Miss Matthews, Commissioner Taylor cautioned, these are allegations that would require court proceedings to establish. I understand, but surely these findings warrant postponing our eviction until ownership can be properly determined. As the commissioners conferred quietly, Sheriff Miller approached the dais and spoke briefly to Commissioner Taylor, who nodded gravely. We'll take a 15-minute recess, she announced. Mr. Blackwood, please remain available. In the hallway, Mabel was waiting with Emma, Liam and Zoe. How's it going? She asked anxiously. Hard to tell, Sarah admitted. They're listening at least. Mabel squeezed her hand. Half the town's talking about Eleanor's evidence. People are remembering old family stories about land that was taken by mistake. Thomas excused himself to make a phone call, while Sarah briefed her children on the proceedings. Across the hallway, she noticed Harrison Blackwood watching them, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he approached. Miss Matthews. He began without preamble. May I speak with you privately? Anything you have to say can be said in front of my family. Sarah replied evenly. Blackwood assessed the situation, then nodded curtly. Very well, I'm prepared to offer you a generous settlement, full ownership of the cabin and surrounding 5 acres, plus $250,000 compensation for your inconvenience. In exchange for what? The documents. All of them. And your silence. Sarah felt Emma stiffen beside her. Those documents don't just concern us, Sarah replied. They affect dozens of families whose land was stolen. Alleged theft from 70 years ago, Blackwood countered. Opening this Pandora's box will only create chaos and uncertainty. Legal battles could drag on for years. Years your children could spend growing up in a secure home with their education funded. Or we could spend those years in our current home, the one Eleanor left specifically to people like us. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily. Be reasonable. One small family against Blackwood Timber. The corporation employs half this town. Do you really want to be responsible for the economic fallout when operations are jeopardized by property disputes? It was a threat veiled as concern. Before Sarah could respond, Mabel stepped forward. I remember when your father used the same tactics against my neighbors, Harrison, she said quietly. When the Miller farm was suddenly reassessed after they refused to sell, or when the Jacobson place mysteriously burned after old Carl challenged a boundary line. Blackwood's face hardened. Careful, Mabel. Unfounded accusations can be libelous. Not when they're documented in Eleanor's records, Thomas interjected, rejoining the group, including your father's handwritten instructions regarding the Jacobson property. As Blackwood retreated to confer with his attorneys, Thomas leaned close to Sarah. The commissioners are calling for additional witnesses. Mabel and several town elders have asked to speak about land transfers they personally witnessed. Sarah watched community members filing back into the chamber, many stopping to offer encouraging words. What had begun as a simple eviction defense was evolving into a public reckoning with decades of injustice. "Mom," Emma whispered, "are we really taking on the whole Blackwood empire?" Sarah squared her shoulders. Eleanor waited 70 years for justice. I think we can manage a few more hours. 3 weeks after the contentious hearing, Sarah stood at the cabin window watching snow blanket the clearing. The eviction had been officially suspended, pending a full investigation into the property claims. Eleanor's documents were now secured in the county vault, with certified copies held by Thomas Reed's firm. Blackwood had retreated from public view, his corporation's lawyers working overtime to contain the damage. Property records taught the county were under review, with dozens of families coming forward with stories similar to Eleanor's. "Mom," Emma called from the kitchen table where she was helping Zoe with homework. "Thomas is here." The young lawyer stomped snow from his boots on the porch before entering, his expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "The DNA results came back," he announced without preamble. Sarah had nearly forgotten that particular thread in their investigation. While organizing Eleanor's documents, they discovered a sealed envelope containing a lock of hair and baby footprints, labeled simply, "My child, April 1953. Eleanor's journals had never mentioned a pregnancy or child, raising questions they'd hoped DNA testing might answer. Sarah prompted, taking the folder he offered. "It's a match to someone in Pinehaven." Thomas glanced at the children. "Is there somewhere we can discuss this privately?" Sarah nodded. "Emma, keep an eye on things. We'll be on the porch." Despite the cold, the covered porch offered privacy. Sarah opened the folder, scanning the technical report before finding the conclusion page. "Mabel?" she whispered in disbelief. "Mabel Porter is Eleanor's daughter?" Thomas nodded. 99.7% probability of a maternal relationship. "I've confirmed Porter was her maiden name, not her married name as everyone assumed. But how? Eleanor never mentioned a child in her journals. There's a sealed section of her personal journal from 1952-1953 that we hadn't opened." Thomas explained. "With this development, I thought you should see it." He handed her a small leather-bound volume. Back inside, Sarah retreated to her bedroom to read the newly unsealed journal, while Thomas entertained the children with updates on the investigation. The entries revealed a heartbreaking story. Eleanor had discovered her pregnancy shortly after leaving her husband. Unmarried, isolated, and vulnerable, she had made the painful decision to place her infant daughter with a childless couple in Pinehaven. The Porters, who owned the General Store. May 15, 1953. "Today I held my daughter for the last time. Martha Porter promised to love her as her own. I believe her. Robert Porter is a good man who will provide stability I cannot offer. They will name her Mabel after Martha's mother. I will watch my child grow from a distance, a stranger to her. This sacrifice splits my heart, but ensures her safety. James would use her against me if he knew, and the Blackwoods would see her as leverage. Better she grow up loved and secure, never knowing the burden of her mother's battles." Subsequent entries revealed Eleanor's secret vigil over her daughter's life, watching school performances from the back row, sending anonymous gifts on birthdays, ensuring from afar that Mabel wanted for nothing. December 24, 1956. Saw Mabel in the Christmas pageant, 8 years old and already so bright, so confident. Martha has done well by her. Sometimes I imagine telling her the truth, but my enemies are watching too closely now. The evidence I've gathered puts anyone connected to me at risk. Better she never knows than becomes a target. The final entry, dated just days before Eleanor's disappearance, February 10, 1957. My preparations are complete. The evidence is secured where only the worthy will find it. I've arranged for the cabin and land to pass eventually to those who need it, as I did. All that remains is to disappear before Blackwood's men act on their threats. I leave behind 2 treasures, the truth, hidden in stone and shadow, and my daughter, hidden in plain sight. Perhaps someday, when justice has been served, Mabel will learn who her mother was. Until then, I carry her in my heart as I journey west under my new name. She didn't die, Sarah whispered to herself. She escaped. When she emerged from the bedroom, Thomas was showing Liam how property surveys were conducted using the antique transit from Eleanor's hidden room. "We need to tell Mabel," Sarah said quietly. "Are you sure that's wise? She's in her 70s. This could be a significant shock. She deserves to know her mother didn't abandon her. She protected her." Sarah gathered her coat, and she might have more information that could help our case. At Mabel's apartment above the store, Sarah gently presented the journal and DNA results. The elderly woman sat silently for long minutes, weathered fingers tracing Eleanor's handwriting. "I always wondered," Mabel finally said, voice thick with emotion. "There were little things, gifts that appeared mysteriously. A woman who watched me from a distance at school events. Mother, Martha, would never discuss it, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with such sadness. You never suspected Eleanor specifically? I was a child when she disappeared. Later I heard the stories, but..." Mabel wiped a tear. "To think she was watching over me all along. The final journal entry suggests she didn't die." Thomas noted, "She created a new identity and fled west. If she survived, she'd be over 100 now." Mabel calculated, "But there might be records, a trail we could follow." Sarah hesitated before asking, "Did you ever feel a presence in the cabin? Like Eleanor was somehow still there?" Mabel smiled mysteriously. "I never spent much time at the cabin. Martha forbade it, said it was dangerous. Now I understand why." She paused, considering. "But yes, I've always felt connected to that place, drawn to it somehow. When you arrived, it felt right." "Zoe believes she speaks with Eleanor," Sarah admitted. "She's known things she couldn't possibly know. Children often sense what adults cannot," Mabel replied simply. "Whether it's Eleanor's spirit or just her legacy speaking through those walls, the connection is real." She squeezed Sarah's hand. "And now we know why she chose your family to find her treasure." "We do?" Mabel's eyes twinkled. Who better to protect a mother's legacy than another mother fighting for her children's future? When they returned to the cabin, Zoe was waiting on the porch, bundled against the cold. "Did you tell her?" she asked immediately. "Tell her what, sweetie?" Sarah replied, startled. "That she's Eleanor's little girl. Eleanor told me a long time ago, but said it was a secret until you found the special papers." Sarah and Mabel exchanged astonished glances. "Yes," Sarah finally answered. "We told her." Spring sunshine warmed the courthouse steps as Sarah and Thomas emerged from the final hearing. Behind them, the historic building buzzed with activity as reporters and townspeople gathered to hear the outcome of what locals now called the Whitman case. "I still can't believe it," Sarah said, squinting in the bright light. "After everything, we actually won." "Eleanor won," Thomas corrected, his professional demeanor giving way to a boyish grin. "We just finished what she started 70 years ago." The county's formal investigation had confirmed the authenticity of Eleanor's documents, prompting the state attorney general to launch a broader inquiry into the Blackwood land acquisition. Faced with mounting evidence and potential criminal charges, Harrison Blackwood had finally agreed to a settlement. "Mom," Emma called, hurrying up the steps with Liam and Zoe in tow. Mabel followed more slowly, leaning on her cane. "What happened? Did they accept the agreement?" Sarah nodded. "It's official. The original Whitman property boundaries are restored, with the cabin and surrounding 50 acres legally transferred to a trust. The Eleanor Whitman Memorial Trust," Thomas added, "with Mabel as the primary beneficiary and trustee." Mabel's eyes glistened. "And as trustee, my first official act was granting lifetime tenancy rights to the Matthews family, with an option to purchase at a nominal fee." "We get to stay?" Liam asked, bouncing on his toes. "We get to stay," Sarah confirmed, ruffling his hair. "The cabin is legally our home now." The settlement extended far beyond their family. Blackwood Corporation was required to establish a substantial restitution fund for other affected families whose land had been fraudulently acquired. The Northern Development Project had been permanently halted, with those acres designated as a nature preserve bearing Eleanor's name. Harrison Blackwood himself had resigned as CEO, facing potential criminal charges, despite his attorney's best efforts to shield him. The corporation's future remained uncertain, but its era of unchecked power in Pine Haven had ended. "What about the other families?" Emma asked as they walked toward Mabel's store, where a community celebration awaited. "Will they get their land back too?" "Some will," Thomas explained. "Others will receive financial compensation. Each case will be reviewed individually. But the most important thing," Mabel added, "is that the truth is finally known. My mother's work wasn't in vain." The investigation had revealed more details about Eleanor's disappearance. Records discovered in California confirmed she had indeed escaped west, establishing a new identity as Ellen White. She had lived a quiet life as a librarian in a small coastal town until her death in 1998, never revealing her true identity, but keeping newspaper clippings about Pine Haven and the Blackwood Corporation. "I wish I could have known her," Mabel said softly. "In a way you did," Sarah replied. "Through your whole life, she was watching over you." Zoe skipped ahead, then turned to walk backward facing them. "Eleanor says she's proud of all of us." After months of Zoe's uncanny insights, the family had stopped questioning her connection to Eleanor's spirit, whether imagined or real. Some things Sarah had learned defied rational explanation. The celebration at Mabel's store lasted well into the evening. Nearly the entire town turned out, many sharing their own family stories of Blackwood's dubious land dealings. What had begun as one family's fight for their home had catalyzed a community's reckoning with its past. As twilight settled over Pine Haven, Sarah found a quiet moment with Thomas on the store's back porch. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "You took our case when no one else would." "Professional curiosity at first," he admitted. "Then it became something more. Justice for Eleanor. That and," he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I admired your determination." "Still do." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibility. Later, Sarah walked with her children and Mabel back to the cabin. The path through the woods, once unfamiliar and threatening, now felt like the most natural route in the world. "What happens next?" Emma asked, falling into step beside her mother. "Practical things," Sarah replied. "I'm keeping the job at Mabel's store. You'll finish school here. We'll continue fixing up the cabin." "I meant with us. After everything we've been through." Sarah considered the question, understanding its deeper meaning. For months, they'd been united by crisis, the eviction threat, Eleanor's mystery, the legal battle. With those resolved, what would define them now? "We build the life we want," she answered finally. "Not just surviving, but thriving." At the cabin, a new deed waited on the kitchen table, officially recording their legal right to the home they'd fought for. Beside it lay the property survey, with the original Whitman boundaries restored. Eleanor's vision finally realized. As the children settled in for the night, Sarah sat on the porch steps watching fireflies emerge in the clearing. The cabin behind her, solid and enduring, represented far more than shelter. It was visible proof that sometimes, Justice merely slumbered, rather than died. That secrets preserved with care could eventually yield truth. That a woman's determination could echo through decades, affecting lives not yet begun when she first took her stand. Inside, Zoe's voice drifted from the loft. "Good night, Eleanor. Thank you for finding us." Sarah smiled, whispering her own thanks to the twilight. Some might call it superstition, but she preferred to think of it as gratitude. To Eleanor, to fate, to whatever constellation of chances had led a desperate, homeless family to exactly the refuge they needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were home. Finally, unquestionably home. 1 year later, the cabin stood transformed. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, new glass gleamed in the windows, and a wooden swing hung from the sturdy branch of a nearby oak. The garden, once overgrown wilderness, now flourished with vegetables, herbs and Eleanor's heirloom flowers, grown from the preserved seeds they'd found in her hidden compartment. Sarah drove the final ceremonial shovel into the soft earth at the clearing's edge, where a circle of newly planted saplings marked the Eleanor Whitman Memorial Grove. Perfect spot, Mabel approved, watching from a comfortable chair brought outside for the occasion. At 76, she had become a grandmother figure to the Matthews children, sharing stories of Pine Haven's past and helping them understand the community they now called home. Eleanor would be pleased, Sarah agreed, wiping soil from her hands. Though Zoe insists she already knows, Mabel chuckled. That child has the sight, as my adoptive mother would have said. She gazed at the cabin thoughtfully. Never imagined I'd be so connected to this place. Funny how life circles back. The trust they had established now served as a model for other communities, addressing historical land injustices. The restitution fund had helped 16 families reclaim properties or receive compensation for Blackwood's fraudulent acquisition. Harrison Blackwood himself had avoided prison through a plea agreement, but was now living in Florida. His family's influence in Pine Haven diminished to a shadow of its former power. Thomas Reed appeared from the path leading to town, a file folder tucked under his arm. His weekly visits had become a family tradition, initially to discuss legal matters, but increasingly for more personal reasons. The final paperwork from the state attorney general, he announced, joining them beneath the shade of the old oak. The last property transfer was completed yesterday. The Whitman case is officially closed. Hard to believe it's really over, Sarah said. Not over, Thomas corrected, just entering a new chapter. Inside the cabin, Emma was packing her room. In the fall, she would begin college at the State University, having earned a scholarship for her research paper on Eleanor Whitman and rural property rights in the post-war era. Her bedroom walls, once bare, were now covered with photographs, half documenting their legal battle, half capturing the normal teenage memories she'd finally been able to create in a stable home. "Mum," Liam called from the kitchen. "Thomas is here, and Mabel says lunch is almost ready." Sarah found her middle child stirring lemonade on the porch, his perpetual energy channeled into what he called expedition planning, detailed maps of the surrounding woods where he led hiking tours for visitors. Curious about the famous Whitman case. "Where's your sister?" she asked. "Garden," Liam replied, talking to Eleanor again. Sarah nodded, no longer questioning Zoe's special connection to the cabin. The 8-year-old had become the unofficial keeper of Eleanor's legacy, maintaining a detailed journal of her own that mimicked Eleanor's careful observations of the natural world. In the garden, Zoe knelt beside a raised bed of herbs, her lips moving in quiet conversation with an unseen companion. When she noticed her mother, she smiled and waved. "Eleanor says the new trees will grow strong," she reported matter-of-factly. "She likes watching us make the cabin beautiful again." "Tell her thank you," Sarah replied, having long since learned to honor her daughter's perceptions. Lunch brought the extended family together around the outdoor table Thomas had built for Sarah's birthday. Mabel shared stories of the town's transformation in the year since the settlement. The Community Land Trust had established new guidelines to prevent future exploitation, and the Blackwood Corporation, under new leadership, was working to rebuild relationships with local families. As the meal ended, Thomas cleared his throat. "I have an announcement," he said, his usual confidence giving way to nervous excitement. "I've been offered a position with the State Attorney General's office, specializing in historical property disputes." "That's wonderful," Sarah exclaimed. "But it's in the capital, 3 hours away." "It is," he acknowledged, "which is why I wanted to discuss it with everyone before deciding." His eyes met Sarah's across the table. "Some things are worth commuting for." The implication hung in the warm summer air. Their relationship had developed slowly, cautiously over months of shared purpose and growing respect. Neither had been in a hurry to define what existed between them. But Thomas's potential move demanded clarity. "We could visit on weekends," Liam suggested practically, "or he could stay in the loft when he's here." "We'll figure it out," Sarah assured Thomas, their shared smile speaking volumes. After the dishes were cleared, Sarah found a moment alone on the porch steps. The setting sun gilded the clearing in golden light, transforming the ordinary scene into something magical. From inside came the sounds of her family, Emma explaining her college plans to Mabel, Liam challenging Thomas to a chess match, Zoe singing softly to herself as she arranged flowers in mason jars. A year ago they had been homeless, desperate, clinging to one another as their only certainty in a collapsing world. Now they stood firmly rooted, not just in this physical place, but in a community and a legacy greater than themselves. Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew a small shovel charm, a gift from Thomas to commemorate the Memorial Grove planting. It caught the fading sunlight, sending a brilliant flash across the clearing like a wink from the universe itself. "Thank you, Eleanor," she whispered to the evening air, "for everything."